Have you ever given your absolute everything, invested years of your life into something only to feel like you're stuck in the same spot? Perhaps you pursued a degree in a field that never resonated with you because someone convinced you it was the sensible choice. Perhaps you launched a venture in the wrong sector, battling resistance day after day. Or perhaps you're scaling a peak right now, drained and doubtful, questioning whether this is even the peak you were destined to conquer. Here's a reality that could transform everything. Sometimes the issue isn't your level of dedication. It's that you're dedicating yourself to the wrong journey. Because when you select the correct direction, half the struggle is already conquered. This is the account of a man who discovered this truth in the most difficult way imaginable by investing 10 years on the incorrect road before understanding what the correct one looked like. Stay with me through to the conclusion, because by the time this account ends, you'll understand precisely how to identify if you're on your correct path. Once upon a time in a thriving city, brimming with ambition and commotion, there lived a 35-year-old attorney named Daniel. On the surface, Daniel possessed everything. A law degree from an elite university, a role at a reputable firm, a salary that made his parents beam with pride, an office bearing his name on the entrance. But internally, Daniel was suffocating. Every morning his alarm sounded like a sentence to confinement. Every case folder felt like a weight. Every courtroom appearance depleted him of energy he couldn't spare. He would sit at his workspace staring at legal paperwork and feel absolutely nothing. No enthusiasm, no thrill, just duty. His peers flourished. They argued cases with intensity in their expressions. They commemorated wins with authentic happiness. They communicated the terminology of law as if it were verse. But Daniel felt like a performer playing a character he never sought. 10 years prior, at 25, Daniel had faced a fork in the road. He loved crafting stories, articles, the manner in which words could create images and touch souls. He aspired to become a journalist, exploring the globe, sharing stories that held significance. But his father, a prosperous entrepreneur, had brought him aside and declared, "Son, writing is a pastime, not a profession. Law is dependable, esteemed, protected. You'll appreciate my guidance eventually." Daniel, youthful and unsure, had heeded. He persuaded himself, "I'll practice law for several years, accumulate wealth, then chase writing." But years transformed into a decade, and the longer he remained, the more difficult it became to depart. Now at 35, Daniel was accomplished by every outward standard and wretched by every inward one. He labored 70-hour weeks but generated mediocre outcomes. Everything demanded twice the exertion it should. He observed younger attorneys advance faster, not because they possessed greater intelligence, but because they cherished what they pursued. Meanwhile, Daniel felt like he was battling against a tide that never ceased. His wife observed, "Daniel," she mentioned one night, "you haven't expressed joy about work in years. When did happiness abandon you?" He wished to respond, but he couldn't. Recall the last occasion work had brought him happiness. That night he couldn't rest. A singular thought circled in his consciousness. What if I'm on the incorrect path? What if I've squandered 10 years? 3 months afterward, Daniel fainted in his office. Extreme fatigue, persistent stress. His body, after years of compelling itself through work it resisted, had finally declared, "Enough." The physician examining his records posed a straightforward question. "What do you do for a living?" "I'm an attorney." The physician hesitated. "Do you find fulfillment in it?" Daniel opened his mouth to say yes. The mechanical response he'd delivered for a decade. But this occasion, in a clinical hospital chamber, confronting the proof of his own exhaustion, the reality emerged. "No, I despise it. I've despised it for years." The physician nodded deliberately. "Your body is attempting to communicate something. You can't invest 40 years battling against your own essence. Something must transform." Daniel departed the hospital with medication and a warning: minimize stress or confront serious health ramifications. But how do you minimize stress when the stress comprises your entire existence? That night, Sitting isolated in his apartment, Daniel did something he hadn't accomplished in 10 years. He opened an aged box from his university days and retrieved a journal containing articles he'd composed at 22. Travel narratives, interviews, pieces about individuals who transformed their communities. He read his own expressions and felt something fracture open in his chest. These weren't merely good. They were vibrant, passionate, authentic. This was who he had been before he selected the secure path. Before he ceased listening to himself, Daniel whispered to the vacant room, "I can't continue this anymore. I'd rather stumble at something I cherish than triumph at something that's destroying me." The following morning, before he could reconsider his mind, he walked to a location he'd heard about but never explored, a modest cafe where a retired journalist named Margaret conducted informal mentorship gatherings for aspiring writers. Margaret was 68 years old with silver hair and eyes that had witnessed 40 years of newsrooms across 3 continents. She had retired from journalism 5 years ago but couldn't abandon teaching. When Daniel sat opposite her, anxious and uncertain, she simply smiled and said, "Tell me your account." And Daniel did all of it. The incorrect degree, the squandered decade, the hospital, the realization that he'd been living someone else's aspiration. When he concluded, he anticipated her to inform him he was too aged to begin anew, that he'd squandered too much time, that he should be realistic. Instead, Margaret retrieved a piece of paper and sketched 2 rivers. "Daniel, envision 2 rivers," she said. "The first river flows south. You desire to travel south. You climb in a boat and begin rowing. The current assists you. Yes, you still must row. Success always demands exertion. But the river itself is cooperating with you. You achieve progress. You feel vital. Even when you're exhausted, you're advancing forward. Every stroke of the oar generates momentum." She sketched the second river. "The second river flows north, but you desire to travel south. So, you climb in a boat and begin rowing against the current. You row vigorously, more vigorously than the individuals in the first river. You invest twice the exertion, 3 times the hours, but you barely advance. The river opposes you every single day. You're depleted, frustrated, and after years of struggle, you glance up and realize you've barely traveled anywhere." She looked at Daniel directly. "Daniel, both rivers demand exertion. Both demand. Good. But one river amplifies your exertions. The other neutralizes them. For 10 years, you've been rowing against your current. That's why it's been so difficult. That's why 70-hour weeks generate mediocre results. That's why you're exhausted. Not because you're indolent or incompetent, but because you're rowing the incorrect direction." Daniel felt tears developing. Someone finally comprehended. Margaret proceeded. "The correct path isn't about being effortless. It's about being synchronized. When you're on the correct path, challenges feel like development, not agony. Exertion feels like contribution, not squander. Hard work revitalizes you instead of depleting you. Here's how you understand if you're on the correct river. First indication, time vanishes when you work. Hours feel like moments. Second indication, obstacles make you resolute, not defeated. Third indication, success arrives faster than it should for the exertion you invest. Fourth indication, people naturally desire to assist you. Doors open, opportunities manifest. Fifth indication, even when you're exhausted, you're satisfied." Margaret leaned back. "Daniel, you're 35. You could invest the next 30 years rowing against the current, arriving at 65 depleted and regretful, or you could invest 6 months transitioning to the correct river and the next 30 years actually sailing." She slid a notebook across the table. "For the next 3 months, I want you to compose every day 1 article, any subject, any length, not for compensation, not for publication, just to reconnect with it. Work that makes you come alive. And at the conclusion of 3 months, we'll discuss what's next." Daniel picked up the notebook like it was a lifeline. "What if I stumble?" Margaret smiled. "Daniel, you're already stumbling at someone else's aspiration. At least if you stumble at your aspiration, you'll stumble while feeling alive." Daniel started modestly. Every morning before the law firm, he awoke at 5 a.m. and composed for 90 minutes. The first week was unpolished. The words felt awkward. He questioned everything. But by week 2, something shifted. He composed an article about a homeless man who constructed a community library. Then a piece about a teacher who transformed an entire school's atmosphere. Then an investigation into a local environmental concern. For the first time in 10 years, Daniel felt the sensation he'd forgotten. Flow. Time vanished. 2 hours felt like 20 minutes. He would glance up from his laptop, astonished that the sun had risen. This was his river during the day. He still attended the law firm, but something had transformed. He ceased caring about becoming partner. He worked his hours competently, but without attachment. His performance actually enhanced because he was no longer desperately attempting to manufacture enthusiasm that didn't exist. Colleagues observed, "Daniel, you appear different, lighter." He was because he was no longer battling himself. At the conclusion of 3 months, Daniel had composed 90 articles. Some were good, some were mediocre, but all of them were his. He returned to Margaret's cafe with the notebook. "I'm prepared," he said. "I'm departing the law firm." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "And pursuing what?" "Freelance journalism, investigative narratives, human interest pieces. I have 3 months of savings. If I can't make it function in that time, at least I'll understand I attempted." She smiled. "Now you're rowing with the current." Daniel submitted his notice. His father was infuriated. His colleagues thought he was irrational. His wife, who had watched him deteriorate for years, simply said, "I'd rather be married to a content writer than a miserable attorney." The first month was frightening. Unstable income, rejection notices, uncertainty. But then a local magazine accepted one of his pieces. Then another publication commissioned an article. Then a nonprofit hired him to compose their annual report. And here's what Daniel discovered. When he worked as an attorney, 10 hours generated mediocre work. When he worked as a writer, 4 hours generated exceptional work. Not because writing was simpler, but because he was finally rowing with his current. Opportunities manifested. Editors recommended him to other editors. Clients referred him to clients. Doors opened that he hadn't even approached. Within 1 year, Daniel was earning the same income as his law salary, but working half the hours and feeling twice as alive. My friend, Daniel's account is not just about careers. It's about life direction, relationships, objectives, every major choice that shapes your existence. Because here's the reality. The correct path doesn't eliminate challenges, but it transforms them. On the incorrect path, challenges feel like punishment. On the correct path, challenges feel like training. On the incorrect path, exertion feels like squander. On the correct path, exertion feels like contribution. On the incorrect path, success is depleting. On the correct path, success is revitalizing. When you select the correct direction, you've already conquered half the struggle. Not because the journey becomes effortless, but because every step you take moves you forward instead of sideways. So ask yourself these 5 questions. 1. When do hours feel like moments? That's your current. 2. What work makes you forget to monitor the time? That's your river. 3. Where do opportunities manifest without you pursuing them? That's your path. 4. What challenge excites you instead of depletes you? That's your direction. 5. If compensation wasn't a factor, what would you pursue every day? That's your answer. And if you're on the incorrect path, if you've been rowing against the current for years, please hear this. It's not too late. Daniel transformed at 35. Margaret knew writers who transformed at 50, at 60, at 70. The optimal time to transform was 10 years ago. The second optimal time is now. You don't have to invest the next 30 years battling yourself. You don't have to arrive at the conclusion depleted and regretful. You have permission to cease rowing against your essence and begin flowing with it. If this account reminded you of a choice you've been avoiding, share it with someone who's also standing at a crossroads. Sometimes we need to hear our own reality reflected back to us before we can act on it. Drop a comment. What river are you rowing right now? And is it flowing in your direction? Until next time, Remember, life is too brief to invest it battling against your own current. Find your river, select your direction, and let the journey transport you forward. Because when you're on the correct path, the destination takes care of itself. If you found value in this video and want more inspiring stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next upload.